Villains are probably one of my favourite aspects of a well-written story, arguably more than a protagonist. Most who fall into this category just have this unique aura to them, one that I easily gravitate to. And most of the time, a villain can be analysed to put further value onto the character, which I love doing. There aren't many series who do villains quite as well as JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and a prime example of this being the very first villain introduced, Dio Brando. There's definitely a lot of mixed opinions concerning our favourite blonde bitch turned vampire. Dio was sort of a hidden gem in terms of further analysis of character, if you take the time to point out its nuances and come straight to the conclusion that he is just bad because he is, when in fact it goes much further than that. But before looking into his character, it would be stupid, moronic, not to point out the astronomical impact this character has on the entire story of JoJo. Without Dio, this story would just not exist. Phantom Blood is Dio's story just as much as it is Jonathan's. Whenever Dio is taking action in the series, it is game-changing, which gives him this aura that is unmatched by any other character in the series. Not even Jotaro, who is basically the face of JoJo, could match the importance that Dio held. In a sense, Dio has always been a catalyst for the bizarre adventures of each part, at least for the first 6. Dio started Jonathan's journey by battling him for superiority. Without Dio, Speedwagon's research of the Stone Mask would have never existed, and the Straits would have never rejected his humanity. Dio's curse is the reason Jotaro went to Egypt, as he was trying to save his mother from it. The arrow would have never made it to Morio without Dio, and there would be little to no stand users there. Josuke would have never gotten a stand without the curse. Pucci would have never carried out the Heaven plan because it was Dio's plan. Not to mention Jolene would never be in prison because Jotaro would actually be able to be with his family. Anyway, I think I've spoken enough about Dio's impact on JoJo. Let's start discussing his character, something a lot of people like to ignore. Firstly, his childhood is definitely one of the reasons Dio is why he is now, seeing as his mother died much too soon, and he was left with Dario, a man that Dio definitely didn't look up to. His environment was filled with scumbags who tried to take advantage of him, so he adapted to his surroundings and beat them to it. This is where we see Dio's ideology form, the very thing leading to the rejection of his humanity. He wants to get back at the world and humanity for treating those he loved and himself unfairly, which is sort of understandable if you give it some thought. Imagine being Dio, having Dario as a father, losing your mother before her time because of assholes like Dario. Imagine enduring all that for a solid 12 years of your life. It would be hard not to have a naturally twisted view of the Earth and those who inhabit it. I'm sure I'd see it that way. As for those who bring up the line from Speedwagon saying, yeah, you were born evil, I'd like to focus some attention onto Araki's book, Manga in Theory and Practice, where he actually takes a look at Dio's motives. The page is called The Allure of Evil Characters, and I think I'll just read it out. On the other hand, humans aren't always pure and good, but carry an ugly side within themselves. It's just that in normal life, morals, laws, and other rules of the world keep those baser natures from display. When an evil character freely exhibits those normally hidden desires and acts in a way the readers could not, the readers can find great catharsis. In the first story arc of JoJo, I always intended to make Dio look cool as he charged headlong down the villain's path, but I think it's due to that catharsis that some readers took to the character with incredible zeal. By providing an outlet for the ugly feelings that we all share, you can depict a more lifelike range of emotions than those of only goodness, and in doing so, you can more effectively evoke readers' empathy. If you can create a truly evil character, your manga will be more likely to become a classic. That being said, being able to get readers to empathize with ugly desires is a tremendously tall hurdle, one that requires thought and planning to overcome. Once you have that ability, you could even turn a heartless killer into your main character. In Dio's case, I depicted him as coming from an unfortunate upbringing, saddled with a father who had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. I gave him a background that could explain his hunger for power and willingness to become evil incarnate to obtain it. Dio wanted to get revenge upon the world for his terrible lot in life, even if it meant taking an evil path and committing deeds contrary to morality and law. In the end, I think readers were able to accept that. By the time Dio was 12, acting like those who were all around him in his childhood was second nature to him. He socially manipulates people for his own gain, commits irredeemable acts for no reason, and has a temper that even he himself cannot control at times. And we see this best when he's brought into the Joestar mansion. There he absolutely destroys Jonathan's life. He sees people like Jonathan as pampered brats who can never understand the life that Dio has had to endure, most likely due to their economic status and a high social upstanding. But the funny thing is, Jonathan begins to adapt just like Dio did, as we see Jonathan take him on and eventually win. From there, we see the best thing to ever come out of Phantom Blood in my opinion, and that's Jonathan and Dio's rivalry/duality. Seeing these two constantly grow to outshine each other is extremely entertaining to see, and it highlights just how similar yet different the two are. If Jonathan is heads, then Dio is tails. This definitely highlights how black and white these two are, but as their rivalry progresses, Dio starts to admire Jonathan and his feats, which is part of his character that stays with him right up to the end of part 3. He refuses to call Jotaro by his nickname JoJo because he sees Jonathan as the only one deserving of that title. While Jonathan grew in strength, Dio relied on the natural abilities handed down by the Stone Mouse to battle Jonathan, so he did not grow at all. You can see this when the hammer-infused rose stabs into his eye. Instead of shrugging it off and keeping calm, he goes into an almost childish fit of anger, not too different from the Dio we see right at the start of Phantom Blood. He's become a child in his own little fantasy and fails to actually grow. This could even explain how comically evil Dio is, actually, from episode 3 onwards. He's become so confident in his ability that he just does whatever he pleases. He almost devolves into the brat that Jonathan was at the start of part 1. He even steals the man's body, despite knowing it has been trained and hammered, because to him, Jonathan has foiled his ideals on humanity being limited in their efforts, and thus is the pinnacle of humanity. This admiration, or rather borderline obsession of Jonathan, adds a bit more depth to Dio rather than, haha, I do evil things because world domination. In the final moments of Phantom Blood, Dio ends up beating Jonathan, ready to steal his body, but not before Jonathan commits his usual act of heroism, killing himself in the process. The one thing that really makes the scene special is the interaction Dio and Jonathan have on the boat. As Jonathan holds Dio's head in his hands, he offers Jonathan eternal life and happiness with Erina. But before Jonathan can answer, his life is snuffed out by his wounds. Dio doesn't rejoice in triumph, instead he's shocked. This could be interpreted in so many ways. 1. Dio was blinded in villainy that he lost touch with reality, is now facing it in the eye and truly regrets the deed he has committed. 2. It may be that he saw Jonathan as unbeatable and someone who could not be killed, and so is genuinely shocked that he was able to. 3. It could even be that this is the way that Dio expressed his love. He was able to love no one in his life other than Jonathan, and he did it through endless battle and scheming against him, as if it were two small animals play fighting. Dio is truly saddened that he lost another person that he, in his eyes, got along with. Either way, the result is the same. This moment adds further depth to Dio's character as we see this secluded side of him that cannot express his emotions normally and is thus destined to be alone. I think the Part 3 Dio is where people start to really complain about him being a bland villain when in fact we get to see some really interesting angles regarding Dio's character and philosophy. After Part 1, Dio had spent 100 years in the bottom of the sea in a coffin which he could not escape without outside assistance. This experience is what makes Dio in Part 3 so introspective on peace of mind, as those years in the coffin were literal hell for him. It's hinted that after this, Dio grew to fear large bodies of water, which is most likely the reason he chose to stay in Egypt, a very dry country, and had manifested a stand with oxygen tanks on his back, a nice reference to Holy Diver. Another change in Dio we see is that he now has Jonathan's body. This may seem like a minor change at first, but it actually affects his character massively. With Jonathan's body now, Dio now has access to 2 new powers, one of which is Jonathan's stand, which just seems to be a better version of Hermit Purple, making Dio the only person in the entirety of JoJo to have 2 stands under his complete control, excluding accident illusions of course, which just adds to the menacing aura. With this, Dio can track the Crusaders' location on their journey, helping to build up this idea that Dio is always watching you, adding some more suspense to the journey. The second power he has is Jonathan's charisma. It isn't obvious at first, but the way that Dio often recruits his underlings is through using Jonathan's body to sort of hypnotize them, then proceeding to use their flesh, blood, or money to fully persuade them. Honestly, I think this makes Dio 10 times scarier, as he can completely swoon you in another 30 seconds, and I know he had actual hypnotism through vampiric technique, but I don't think it's as good or effective as pure charisma. It's really interesting to see how he bends Jonathan's natural charisma for his own benefit, nothing I wouldn't expect from someone like Dio though. I could talk about how this affects Giorno, but he's not a big bad, and I think you've heard it a million times, so now I'll just pretend Giorno isn't here and doesn't exist all that. Dio's relationship with the Crusaders was only really used to build up Dio as the final obstacle in their journey. Seeing all the backstory from the characters like Avdol and Kakyoin makes Dio seem immensely powerful and horrifying. This Dio doesn't have any investment in these characters, as in his mind, they could never achieve the same heights that Jonathan did. By doing this, Dio puts himself on this pedestal that makes him even more menacing than before, tying in well with how much of an impact Dio has on the series as a whole. Honestly, out of his three main appearances, Part 3 is probably my least favourite iteration. I love how over the top he is, but I don't think I could pick out as much with him as I could with the other version of him. Nevertheless, he's a character with lots of nuance, and everyone who says the Heaven Plan in Part 6 came out of nowhere, well, I'm sorry to say this, but you're wrong. On to his appearance in Part 6. This Dio is probably the most liked out of all of his iterations, and it's obvious to see why. There's just so much to admire about his newly awakened Dio, the Heaven Plant, and how this Dio segues into his Part 3 iteration. If I'm gonna start somewhere, it should definitely start with his relationship with Poochie. This is possibly one of my favourite things to come out of Stone Ocean, as here we get to see Part 6 become more involved in the grand story, as well as adding to Poochie's character. Dio didn't see Poochie as a mindless follower, as opposed to someone like Vanilla Ice, but rather, Poochie was almost Dio's equal, maybe even a friend, as we see Poochie even disagree with Dio in their conversations. I love how Dio deals with this. Instead of being more comfortable around Poochie, he's more paranoid than ever, expecting betrayal right around the corner from his most trusted confidant. And this is surprised to find out that this isn't the case. Dio just doesn't know how to make friends, which I find quite poetic. The man who wanted to be on top finally just sees how lonely it is up there. It almost belittles Dio and makes us feel for him, even if it is just a bit. Dio isn't a main focus in Stone Ocean, but his appearance after being absent for 2 parts made his return all that more impactful for the reader. There isn't much to be said about this iteration of Dio because there isn't really much we see of him that isn't seen in Poochie. I could talk about the Heaven Plan, but that's honestly its own video, which people have already covered. Also, it's more Poochie's thing, and we haven't got to that. And honestly, I think that is all I have to say really for Dio. I love this character. He's in my top 3 JoJo villains, and it's one of my favorites of all time. And I think we've gone past a point where it's like, oh, Dio's just your average everyday villain. But part of me still wanted to make this. I wanted to put it out there. I wanted to get my own thoughts on it. And honestly, I'm really glad I did. This script took so long to make, so long to voice. This has been just in like the back of my mind for a while now. So it's really good to get my thoughts out there. Honestly, if you're like a newcomer to JoJo and it's like, oh, you don't really like Dio, I'd say give him a chance. If you're just starting, you're really like, oh no, part 3 through. I'd say, yeah, he becomes this great. Oh god, I don't want to talk about Dio for another bloody how long? Jesus, I always get off like off topic with these things. Anyway, I think my next video will be on cars. I think I'm just gonna do this in order. And after that it'll be Kira and all that. Anyway. That'll be it for this video. If you like these analytical videos, then I suggest you subscribe to my channel because I like doing that stuff. If you like dumb jokes, I also do those, you know? I've got my Twitter where I constantly like put out my opinions on the manga and anime I'm reading / watching. If you'd like to hear my more personal thoughts, then Twitter is definitely your guy. I have a Discord, quite a few of my subs are on there and a couple of close friends. If you want to chat, you know, not many people in there. It's pretty empty. So yeah, want to have a chat? Go for it. Anyway, I think that'll be it. I've done enough rambling. This has been half the video. Thank you so much for watching this video, and see you soon. Bye.